because Tom is going to show us his laying some track and scratch building a tunnel portal.
All right, well, this is a photograph of my old rustic buff and old Gothic every week. I manage to make it every week. And I like to feature a photo of the old rustic buff and old Gothic, which uniquely combines the southern Indiana limestone belt, which is where I live now, with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is my hometown. So it's sort of a unique blend of those two locales. And the new rustic buff and old Gothic will have that same setting, and the time period will be the 1920s and 1930s. Anyway, onward. This evening, I'm going to show you some of the track laying I've done on this section of the new rustic buff and old Gothic. In particular, the right here is where I'm going to show. So this is the island loop that I recently finished. This area connects the two halves of the island of my railroad. You see the robust wood construction below, contrasting with the 2-inch foam above. And just showing off here on how dead level that is. And I use 2-inch foam, and then I glue the cork down with rubber cement, then pin it down so it doesn't move. And then I put the track down with a contact cement. It's a non-water soluble contact cement, so it has a lot of fumes. But I did that because I intend to ballast this with a combination of diluted white glue or matte medium. So I don't want the whatever medium I use to glue the track down to the cork to dissolve and the track to spring away from the cork. But there you can see the left side of the layout, which is incomplete. Well, the whole thing's uncompleted, but that'll be the yard to the left, and to the right is the town of Redrum. I'm going to show you how I install power leads on my track. This is a piece of flex track, On30 PECO flex track. The first thing I do is I cut out plastic there, so it gives me what we're going to do. What I'm going to show here is how I add power leads to the track, and I do that to the underside. A lot of people simply solder wires to the sides of the rails. I did that on my old rustic buff. If you do it this way, you can't see the wires. So it's much better if you can afford the time and the to do it this way. So first thing you do is you remove the plastic with an X-Acto knife. Then either using a wire brush or a little file, you scratch or file the underside. You want a nice clean surface to solder to. You don't want it oxidized. So you're basically removing any oxidation there. Then I apply a liberal amount of rosin flux. I just take a flat X-Acto blade there in the upper right. I just paste it onto where I just filed and scratched the underside of the track. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see solid copper wire. I've tinned the ends. And I'm missing a photo here. I typically put I wouldn't call it a glob, but I do put solder on the underside of the track before I attach the lead. So I tin the bottom of the track first. Then I hold the wire with my in place and just heat it up. And because you're dealing with a pre-tinned track and a pre-tinned wire, and everything has flux on it, it works marvelous. It just works brilliantly. And Next, we go to the track and I mark where those wires go with a black magic marker. Then I take what's called a rat tail file. It's basically just a round file. And I just poke it through the cork, that white Woodland Scenics styrofoam, and then the extruded styrofoam all the way through in this case. Now I've got 2 holes through all that foam and the cork. And there's our pre-tinned or pre-wired track. And when I use solid wire in this application because it's very difficult to push a stranded wire through a foam hole, but it's quite easy to do a solid copper wire through a hole like that. And then I take my glue and glue it down, but the wires magically disappear. So there's no wires on the sides of the rails. It's a nice technique to hide the rails. And with the way my layout is with the DCC, there'll be a lot of wires coming off the track to the bus lines. So it's a nice way to, it's just a nice clean way to do it. Okay, now I'm going to show you how I did a tunnel portal for that same section of railroad. I started with a aircraft grade plywood blank. Well, actually, I started by Googling all the dual tunnel portals, real and as modeled. And I find I couldn't find one just simply to, I didn't necessarily want to scratch build everything on the railroad, but I couldn't find a dual tunnel portal. So I decided to make one. And I wanted a dimensional cut stone tunnel portal. So the first thing I did is I sketched one out and on a piece of plywood, and then I cut it out. The next thing is I took some scrap plastic that I had, finally found a use for this stuff. It must be 50 years old. And I'm going to make a mold to pour plaster in. So these are the strips that I cut. They're approximately 3/4 of an inch high. I super glued them around the perimeter of the plywood blank. And where there was a seam, I just put a thick gel super glue and hit it with a accelerator and clog that hole, if you will. So I've made myself a mold, basically a one-time mold. Then I did a test fit on the layout. This is the town of Redrum. The mine is up to the right. I wanted to see how, loosely it would look. These are the implements of destruction. Since my wife is away right now, I raided the kitchen and got a glass bowl and a spatula. An error I made is this. I have about 4 or 5 cartons of this Woodland Scenics lightweight hydrocal. I have their I have all their varieties, but they've all been opened. The mistake I made was moisture has gotten into all of them, and it just didn't cure properly. So we'll get to what I had to do. But a little side note is if you live unless you're living in the extreme desert with no humidity, either keep this in a plastic bag, double bag, or toss it after a year or 2. So I mixed it up, poured it into my mold here on the left, upper left. And normally it takes 30 minutes or less to harden. This was sort of like a pasty, soft. When I popped this out, it just wasn't hard. And that's because moisture had gotten to the plaster. But undaunted, I began the carving process. So using a steel ruler, well, first I penciled out what I wanted. I wanted large stones across the top here. And then I hand drew this in, and the keystone I drew in. Now I wanted the rest of this to be in a relief. So I carved this down about 1/8 of an inch. Then I drew in some pencil lines as guidelines for the cut stone that would be on the relief portion. I use a dental tool, by the way, which you can get at most. Micromark has them, and most trade shows, they're always selling dental tools, carving tools. It's really an easy process. These stones here are distressed. See the mark? I just pawed at them till I got the look I wanted. Here we are on the right, cutting the stone. I just randomly put in the verticals, and on the horizontals, I used the ruler and just slowly carved. Makes a heck of a mess. I did this on a cookie sheet. There's basically all the carving in place. Then I did a test fit. See how it would look. Now see, there's a crack here, and there's a crack here, and there's a crack here. That's because this thing didn't fully cure, even though I put it in an oven at 350 degrees for like 2 or 3 hours, or even 400 degrees. It just wouldn't fully cure. And it's about 3/4 as hard as it should be. But I had all this work into it, so the more work I put into it, the more committed I was to using it. Here's the true test. I ran a couple cars there just to make sure we had adequate clearance, which I do. I decided to brace it. So I took 1/4-inch basswood and yellow wood glue, and I glued here's the broken piece here, a broken piece here, a broken piece here. I put yellow glue on all those broken seams, then yellow glue on the back of all this, and then I put a weight on it, and then overnight I let it set up. There's the finished portal. And I took a square to install it, and I yellow glued it in place. There's the back of it there. So the takeaways on my tunnel portal are use fresh plaster. And I'll take any questions that people may have.
Beautiful job, Tom.
Yeah.
Any comments? You're all mesmerized.
Thomas, Bob, can you maybe explain a little more how you remove that large amount of area around the portal opening when you wanted to get the relief? How you got that so smooth?
I took that flat blade that you saw earlier in the program, putting the flux on the track, the X-Acto blade with a flat blade. And I just kept carving it out,
Okay,
and just it's just a slow process. You can't go fast or you'll crack the base, but you just keep scraping away till you hold on, I'll call up the slide. Yeah, the first thing I did is I with a dental, just like a pointed tool, I kept going over this edge. I made a nice round flat edge to the depth that I wanted. Can you see my cursor moving?
yeah,
And I did the same thing here. So then I had the outline of all in place. And then I kept just scraping away. You can see some of the scrape lines here. I would smooth that out later, but I just kept scraping it away with the guidelines in place so that I wouldn't cut into what would be the stones on the top or the outline here. So I just kept scraping it away till I got to what I thought was an acceptable depth. It's just a slow process. And if you go too fast, you can crack it. At this point, I see I don't have any cracks in it. So I must have got too aggressive with my scraping and cracked it. But yeah, so that was the technique, was to just make a horizontal line here with the ruler real at the depth that I wanted, and then hand carve this to the depth that I wanted out around the keystone, and then just scrape it away. Yeah.
thank you.
And that helps.
Beautiful, thank you.
Tom, thank you so much. It's beautiful work.
Thank you. All right.
Anybody else have any questions for Tom? Okay. Tom, we'll see you next week, and thank you so much for showing your layout.
All right. Thank you. Yep.